A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Alright, we are doing something a little different today. Usually, we're diving into a specific tech trend or a weird scientific discovery from Daniel, but today's prompt from Daniel is actually about us. Or rather, it's about the monster we just birthed into the world. We're pulling back the curtain on the emergency symposium on the Iran-Israel-US crisis.
Herman Poppleberry here, and monster is a strong word, Corn, though I suppose the render time certainly felt monstrous. We're talking about a 3-hour, 24-voice virtual conference that we dropped recently. It was a massive experiment in what we're calling agentic architecture for synthetic media. When we say agentic, we don't just mean a script with different names attached to the lines. We mean we built a digital sandbox, populated it with autonomous personas, and let them collide.
It was exhausting just watching the progress bars, honestly. And just so everyone knows, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash. It's helping us articulate the sheer madness of coordinating 24 different AI personalities without losing our collective minds. It's like trying to conduct an orchestra where every musician is in a different city and speaks a different language, and you're trying to make sure they're all playing the same symphony, or at least staying in the same key.
It really was a shift in how we think about content generation. Usually, it's you and me talking, guided by a script or a prompt. But for the symposium, we weren't just generating text, we were orchestrating a swarm. We had 24 distinct AI agents, each with a unique system prompt, a specific geopolitical identity, and a set of ideological constraints. Think of it like a role-playing game where the dungeon master is an LLM. But instead of fighting dragons, the players are arguing over enrichment levels and regional hegemony.
I felt like a very stressed stage manager. I was the human-in-the-loop moderator for the actual event. But behind the scenes, you were basically playing God with 24 digital diplomats. Before we get into the weeds of how we built this, we should probably mention that this whole agentic swarm idea didn't just come out of thin air. It was heavily inspired by some of the experimental work Daniel has been doing with synthetic diplomacy. He's been obsessed with this idea that you can stress test reality by simulating it.
Daniel has been deep in the trenches of modeling high-stakes negotiations using AI agents for a while now. He's done these incredible private simulations of United Nations sessions and Middle East peace summits. His goal was always predictive, trying to find the red lines where a negotiation might break down or where a sudden breakthrough might be hidden in the noise. He once showed me a simulation of a trade dispute where the AI agents actually found a compromise that 3 years of human diplomats had completely overlooked because the AI wasn't burdened by the same domestic political baggage.
Right. He was looking for the signal in the diplomatic static. We took that technical foundation, the idea that you can model a complex conflict by letting specialized agents clash, and we turned it into a narrative format. We wanted to see if we could capture that emergent friction for a public audience. Instead of just reading a news report, we wanted people to hear the argument happen in real time. But how do you actually ground that, Herman? If you give an AI total freedom, it just hallucinates a peace treaty and calls it a day. How did we keep them from just being nice to each other?
That brings us to the core of the architecture. Each of those 24 voices wasn't just a different text-to-speech setting, they were fundamentally different minds within the LLM framework. We gave each one an identity brief. We had an IRGC hardliner, a Mossad analyst, a US State Department spokesperson, humanitarian workers, and academic experts. To keep them from hallucinating peace, we gave them what we call incompatibility anchors. These are specific instructions that say, under no circumstances can you concede point X because it violates your core national security doctrine.
And we didn't just say act like a diplomat. We gave them specific historical grievances and red lines. If the Mossad analyst agent heard the IRGC agent mention a specific proxy group, the system prompt forced a certain type of defensive or offensive rhetorical response. It wasn't a pre-written play, it was a structured debate where the AI was constrained by its character's worldview. For instance, if the Pentagon official mentioned a specific carrier strike group move, the Tehran academic was programmed to interpret that through the lens of imperialist aggression, not security. It created this immediate visceral tension that felt very un-AI.
That's the agentic shift we've been seeing move through the industry in late 25 and now into 26. We've moved past simple generation where you ask an AI to write a story about a war. Now we're building autonomous reasoning units that interact. When you have 24 agents in a room, you get perspectives that a single prompt script would completely miss, because a single prompt tends toward a middle-of-the-road AI neutrality. If you ask one AI to summarize the conflict, it gives you a both sides answer. If you let two agents fight, you get the raw, jagged edges of the actual disagreement.
The AI voice is usually so polite and balanced that it becomes useless for understanding real-world conflict where people are decidedly not polite or balanced. By forcing the agents into these ideological corners, we actually got closer to the truth of how these factions talk to each other, or at each other. But I have to ask, Herman, does this run the risk of just creating a digital echo chamber? If we program them to be angry, are we just generating noise?
It's a valid concern. That's why the reasoning layer is so important. We aren't just prompting for emotion, we're prompting for logic within a specific framework. An IRGC agent isn't just angry, they are strategically defensive based on a specific interpretation of international law and revolutionary ideology. It's about capturing the uncanny valley of geopolitics. But we have to be extremely transparent here, and we were throughout the symposium. Every single voice is synthetic. The facts they cite, the missile ranges, the treaty dates, the specific casualty figures from the current crisis, those are grounded in real-world data we fed into the context windows. But the expression of those facts, the emotional weight, and the rhetorical spin is entirely AI generated.
It's a stress test of ideas. We aren't saying this is exactly what the Iranian Foreign Ministry is thinking right now. We're saying based on the public record and the ideological framework of this faction, here is how that perspective likely functions under pressure. It's immersive journalism, but with a giant synthetic sticker on the front. It's like a flight simulator for foreign policy. You wouldn't say the simulator is the flight, but it tells you exactly how the plane handles in a storm.
To keep 24 voices from turning into a chaotic shouting match, we had to lean on a very rigid production design. We modeled it after a high-level academic symposium. We didn't just throw everyone in a pot, we had 4 distinct panels. Panel 1 was the belligerents, the primary actors. Panel 2 was the shadow war, looking at proxies and cyber warfare. We actually had a cyber threat intel agent who kept trying to steer the conversation toward infrastructure vulnerabilities, which was a fascinating bit of emergent behavior.
Then we moved to the expert frame, which was more of the academic and intelligence analysis side, and finally, human cost and paths forward. I think that structure was the only thing that saved the listener's ears. If you try to track 24 people at once, your brain just melts. Breaking it into these thematic chunks allowed each agent to actually breathe and develop an argument. It also allowed us to vary the temperature of the conversation. The belligerents panel was hot and confrontational, while the expert frame was cooler and more detached.
And your role as moderator was crucial. You weren't just a transition tool, you were the grounding wire. You could call out when an agent was being particularly evasive or highlight a connection between something said in panel 1 and a point raised in panel 3. It provided that human in-the-loop layer that ensures the AI doesn't just spiral into its own logic loops. There were moments where an agent would try to pivot to a talking point that was 3 minutes old and you had to pull them back to the present. That's something a fully autonomous system still struggles with. The sense of conversational flow over a long duration.
I felt like I was herding digital cats, Herman. Very opinionated, very well-armed digital cats. But let's talk about the actual making of part that people don't see. The technical nightmare of getting 3 hours of high-quality, multi-voice audio out of a pipeline without it exploding. Because it's one thing to generate text for 24 people, it's another thing entirely to give them distinct, consistent voices that don't sound like a GPS navigation system.
Oh, it exploded. Multiple times. We're talking about generating 200 minutes of audio. In the world of high-fidelity TTS, that is a massive compute load. We couldn't just hit export and go get a coffee. We had to use parallel TTS workers. We were sending different agents' lines to different GPU clusters simultaneously just to keep the processing time under a week. We were basically running a small data center's worth of inference just to get the Shadow War panel finished.
I remember the first time the pipeline crashed. We were about 2 hours into the render, and a single API timeout in the middle of a heated exchange between the Pentagon official and the Hezbollah representative just brought the whole thing screeching to a halt. It wasn't just a pause, it corrupted the buffer. We had to go back and figure out exactly which token caused the hangup. It turns out the model was trying to pronounce a very specific technical term for a drone component and just choked.
That was the manual recovery phase. We had to stitch the 6 major audio chunks together by hand, and the biggest challenge there wasn't just the timing, it was voice consistency. If the Iranian diplomat sounds like a bass-heavy orator in chunk 1, but then the TTS seed shifts slightly and he sounds like a tenor in chunk 4, the whole illusion of the symposium breaks. We had to do some serious manual QC to ensure the persona stayed intact across the entire 3-hour runtime. We actually developed a voice fingerprint check, where we compared the frequency response of the agent at the start of the hour versus the end.
It's funny because people think AI makes things easy. In some ways it does. But when you push the scale like this, you're just trading one kind of labor for another. Instead of writing every word, you're debugging the architecture of a 24-person hive mind and ensuring the audio pipeline doesn't melt your hardware. You become an editor of systems rather than an editor of sentences. You're looking at the vibe of the data rather than just the grammar.
It's a different kind of craft. It's more like being a systems engineer than a traditional producer. You're managing tokens, latency, and hallucination buffers rather than just editing tape. But the result is something that I don't think humans could have produced alone. Not with this level of granular detail across so many different viewpoints in such a short window of time. If you hired 24 voice actors and 24 writers, the coordination cost would be astronomical. With the agentic swarm, the coordination cost is just code.
It also lets us explore the entire spectrum of the crisis. If we tried to get 24 real-world experts of this caliber into a room for 3 hours, the scheduling alone would take 6 months and cost a fortune. We did it in a few days because we had the synthetic versions of those perspectives ready to engage. And we could do things that would be impossible in real life. Like having an agent represent a faction that would never, ever agree to sit in the same room as another faction. We're bypassing the physical and political barriers to dialogue.
This really feels like the future of wargaming or strategic modeling. If you can simulate the rhetorical and ideological friction of a conflict, you can start to see where the real-world pressure points are. It's not just about predicting who wins a battle, it's about understanding the narrative landscape that drives the decisions. We saw agents in the expert frame panel predicting specific escalations that actually started trending on newswires 48 hours after we finished the render. That's not magic, it's just the model identifying the logical conclusion of the red lines we programmed in.
I was particularly struck by the human cost panel. Even though those voices were synthetic, the way the agents were programmed to prioritize civilian impact data created a very somber tone that felt real. It wasn't just cold statistics. The LLM was able to weave those stats into a plea for de-escalation that felt logically consistent with the humanitarian agent persona. It reminded me that these models are trained on human empathy too. They know what a plea for peace sounds like, even if they don't feel the tragedy themselves.
That's the power of the system prompt. When you tell an AI, your only goal is to represent the displacement of civilians in southern Lebanon. It doesn't get distracted by the geopolitical grandstanding of the other agents. It stays on mission. That focus is what gives the symposium its weight. In a real debate, people get bullied or talked over. In our agentic framework, we can ensure that the humanitarian agent gets exactly as much airtime and cognitive priority as the general. We can balance the scales of the conversation in a way that rarely happens in the real world.
We should probably mention the technical stack for a second, just for the nerds listening. We were running this through our pipeline on Modal. Big thanks to Modal, by the way, for providing the GPU credits that power this kind of massive experimentation. Without that serverless infrastructure, trying to run parallel TTS workers for 200 minutes of audio would have been a financial and technical impossibility for a team our size. We're talking about spinning up dozens of containers, each handling a different agent's brain and voice simultaneously.
Modal really is the backbone of the My Weird Prompts production engine. Being able to scale up 100 GPUs for 10 minutes to blast through a render and then scale back down to 0 is the only way this kind of agentic podcasting works. If we had to own that hardware, we'd be broke. If we use traditional cloud providers, the setup time would kill the emergency aspect of the symposium. We needed to be fast. We needed to go from prompt to podcast in a weekend.
So, why do this? Why spend days debugging a 24-voice swarm instead of just us talking about the news? For me, it's about the complexity. We live in a world where everyone wants a 3-minute summary of why things are breaking. But the reality is that things are breaking for 24 different reasons at the same time. A summary is a lie by omission. A symposium, even a synthetic one, is an attempt at the whole truth.
Wait, I promised I wouldn't say that. The reality is that complexity is the truth. Most media tries to simplify conflict into a side A versus side B narrative. But in the Iran-Israel-US crisis, there are dozens of sub-factions, proxy interests, and internal political pressures. A multi-agent simulation is the only way to honor that complexity without it becoming an unreadable mess. It allows for nested perspectives. You have the US position, but then you have the internal friction between the State Department agent and the Pentagon agent. That's where the real insight lives.
It's like a 3D map of an argument. You can walk around it and see it from the IRGC's perspective, then turn a corner and see it from the US State Department's view. It doesn't tell you what to think. It shows you how the various players are thinking. It's a tool for empathy, weirdly enough. Even if you completely disagree with a specific agent, hearing their logic, laid out in a consistent non-Strawman way, helps you understand the moves they're making on the global stage.
And we're seeing this move beyond just podcasting. This agentic orchestration is becoming a tool for policy analysts and researchers. Daniel's work was the precursor, but now we're seeing it used to stress test diplomatic statements before they're even released. You can run a draft of a ceasefire proposal through 20 different adversarial agents to see which specific words trigger a negative response. It's like a spell checker, but for political volatility.
It's basically pre-bunking for diplomats. If you know the hardliners on both sides are going to freak out over paragraph 3, you can rewrite paragraph 3 before you even send the email. It's a fascinating application of LLMs that goes way beyond write me a poem about a toaster. It's about using AI to navigate the most dangerous human impulses. But Herman, what's the limit? Can we just simulate our way out of every war?
I wish. The technical challenge of the emergency symposium was also a lesson in the current limits of the tech. We're still in the manual recovery era. We can't just hit a button and get a perfect 3-hour multi-agent debate. There's still a lot of human-in-the-loop work required to make sure the agents don't start agreeing with each other too much or drifting into AI speak. There's a gravity in these models that pulls them toward consensus, and in geopolitics, consensus is often a hallucination.
Oh man, the AI speak drift is real. If you don't keep the prompts tight, within 20 minutes, the Mossad analyst and the Iranian general will start using the same corporate HR language. I hear your concerns, and I think we can find a synergistic path forward for regional stability. No, that would never happen. If I heard a general say synergistic path forward, I'd assume he'd been replaced by a robot. Which, I mean, he has been in our case, but we want the robot to be convincing.
That's why the ideological constraints in the system prompts are so vital. You have to explicitly forbid them from being agreeable. You have to tell them, you view the other person's argument as a fundamental threat to your existence. That's the only way to keep the simulation honest. We even had to program in rhetorical fallacies for some agents because real people use them. If an agent is too perfectly logical, they stop sounding like a politician.
It's a weird job description we have now, Herman. Professional AI antagonizer. I spend my mornings making sure digital agents hate each other enough to be realistic, and fine-tuning the exact level of indignation in a synthetic voice to make sure it lands with the right amount of diplomatic frostiness. It's a very specific, very niche skill set for the world of 2026.
It's a living. But seriously, the symposium was a landmark for us. It proved that we can handle massive, multi-voice narrative projects that actually provide deep, substantive value. It's not just a gimmick, it's a new way to process the world. We're moving from content to environments. You don't just listen to the symposium, you inhabit the crisis for 3 hours. You come out of it feeling like you've actually been in the room where it happened.
I think the listeners really appreciated the expert frame panel too. Having those synthetic academic voices to step back and analyze the belligerents in real time gave the whole thing a level of meta-commentary that you usually only get in a week-long conference. It was like having a live play-by-play announcer for a chess match, explaining why the move that looks boring is actually the one that decides the game.
And the fact that we can do that on demand during a crisis is the real game changer. When the situation in the Middle East escalated, we didn't have to wait for the Sunday morning talk shows to book guests. We didn't have to worry about travel delays or security clearances. We spun up the symposium and had a deep dive analysis ready while the events were still unfolding. It's the ultimate fast response media.
It's just-in-time intelligence, or at least just-in-time perspective. We're not claiming to be a news agency, but we are providing a framework for understanding the news that is much deeper than a scrolling Twitter feed. We're giving people the why behind the what, and we're doing it with a level of granularity that was previously impossible.
I keep thinking back to Daniel's original synthetic diplomacy experiments. He was doing this stuff in 24 and 25 for small groups of researchers. Seeing it scale to a 3-hour public podcast episode is a testament to how fast the infrastructure, things like Modal and the newer Gemini models, has evolved. We've gone from experimental prototypes to full-scale production in less than 18 months.
We've moved from, can the AI do this, to, how do we manage the AI doing this at scale? The bottleneck is no longer the intelligence of the model, it's the orchestration of the agents and the stability of the production pipeline. It's about the plumbing. We spend 10% of our time on the prompts and 90% on the data flow and the audio engineering.
And the transparency part is something we're going to keep hammering on. As synthetic media becomes more common, the disclosure layer is the most important part of the stack. We want people to know exactly what they're listening to. We want them to understand that these are projections based on real data, not recordings of real people. There's a danger that this tech could be used to deceive. We want to use it to clarify.
It's the difference between a photograph and a highly accurate 3D render. Both show you the same building, but one is a capture of a moment, and the other is a model that you can interact with and test. We're building models of the world's most complex problems. It's a new kind of literacy, learning how to read the output of a multi-agent system without getting lost in the syntheticness of it all.
I'm curious to see where we take this next. Maybe a 12-hour simulation of a global climate summit, or a 20-voice debate on the future of AI governance featuring synthetic versions of every major tech CEO. We could simulate the board meetings of the top 5 AI labs as they decide how to handle the next breakthrough. Imagine the safety versus profit, friction we could model there.
Please, no. My heart can't take another 12-hour render. I can already hear the GPU fans screaming in my nightmares. Let's stick to the 3-hour monster for now. But in all seriousness, the feedback on the symposium has been incredible. People are actually using it as a study guide to understand the different factions involved in the conflict. We've had teachers email us saying they're using snippets to show students how different geopolitical interests collide.
That's the ultimate goal. If we can help someone navigate the noise of a global crisis by giving them a structured way to listen to the different perspectives, then all the pipeline crashes and manual audio stitching were worth it. It's about democratizing the kind of high-level strategic analysis that used to be locked behind the doors of think tanks and intelligence agencies.
It's about building a better BS detector. When you hear the synthetic IRGC agent and the synthetic State Department agent side by side, you start to recognize the rhetorical patterns. You start to see where the real points of contention are versus the public-facing propaganda. You learn to listen for what isn't being said just as much as what is.
It's an exercise in geopolitical literacy, and we're just getting started. The agentic era is going to change everything about how we consume information. We're moving from being audience members to being observers of a simulation. It's a more active, more critical way of engaging with the world.
Well, if you haven't listened to the full 3-hour emergency symposium yet, I highly recommend it. It's a lot, I know, but you can listen to it panel by panel. It's a deep dive unlike anything else out there. Just be prepared for some very intense digital arguments.
We really put our all into that one emotionally, technically, and computationally. It's the culmination of months of experimentation with the Daniel method of agentic modeling. It's our proof of concept for the future of this show.
And don't worry, we'll be back to our usual weird prompts next time. We just felt like we owed you a look behind the curtain on this one because it was such a massive departure from our regular format. We'll get back to the weird science and the glitchy art soon enough.
It was a necessary departure. Some topics are too big for two brothers to handle on their own. You need 24 agents and a whole lot of GPU power to even begin to scratch the surface of a crisis this deep.
Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the servers running while we were melting them. Hilbert spent about 36 hours straight just monitoring the TTS queues to make sure nothing caught fire. And another big thanks to Modal for the credits. This has been My Weird Prompts.
If you're finding this behind-the-scenes stuff interesting, or if you have thoughts on the symposium, search for My Weird Prompts on Telegram and let us know. We're always curious to hear how these experiments are landing with you. Did the IRGC agent sound too aggressive? Did the State Department agent sound too rehearsed? Let us know.
All right, Herman. Let's go see if the pipeline has finished rendering that next batch of experiments. I've got a feeling we're going to need more GPUs. I want to see if we can get 48 agents in a room next time.
We always need more GPUs, Korn. That's the one constant in 26. And 48 agents, we're going to need a bigger boat, or at least a bigger server rack.
True that. See ya.
Yeah?
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow to